Hey guys, good evening. Todd Sachs of Sachs Realty, and welcome to the third episode of Tuesday Night Live. Right now, we're streaming live on our Facebook channel and our YouTube channel. And if you guys are listening to this on video or audio after the recording, certainly we would appreciate if you would hit like and subscribe and hit that bell if you're on YouTube so you can get more great content like this. Tonight, we talk about everything and anything real estate. And tonight, we have a really exciting episode. We have a friend of mine that is on deck. His name is Neil Roseman, and he owns a company called Lead Probe. And tonight, we're going to discuss everything that you need to know about lead paint. And guys, the way that this works is that you can actually comment, and we'll try and answer your questions or your comments or your concerns right here on the show. So if you are on Facebook, you just post your comments or question, and you can chat with us live on YouTube. And if you're watching or listening later, you can send me an email directly at ts@sacsrealty.com. That's TS for Todd Sachs. It's sacsrealty.com. And so we're a small boutique brokerage here in Maryland. So we're actually kind of nestled right between DC and Baltimore. And we have both residential and commercial divisions. So if you're in Maryland, we'd certainly love to help you directly with your real estate needs. And if you're all over the country and you're listening and tuning in and you'd like some help, we have a broker network all over the country. We're glad to make sure that you get pointed in the right direction when you're buying or selling. So in this episode, we're going to dive deep into, lead paint. Is it really dangerous? We hear so much in our business. We have to deal with it all the time with disclosure forms. And we're really talking about properties that are pre-1978. So if you live in a pre-78 home and you're getting ready to maybe do some remodeling, or you're looking at buying an older home, this is something you're going to want to listen to. And especially if you're a real estate agent and you just want more knowledge on the subject, tonight's the night to get that. And, if you're a contractor, renovator, tune in. We're going to touch everything. Landlords, we're going to talk the whole gamut. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend, Neil Roseman. Neil, welcome to the show, and tell everybody a little bit about you.
Well, thank you, Todd, and thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And I own Lead Probe. We're a lead paint inspection company, and we've done probably over 70 to 80,000 lead paint inspections in Maryland and DC over the last 16 years. We've been in business.
That's a lot.
Yes.
So you work primarily, I guess, for real estate agents. You're referred when people want to know if the house has lead, or contractors, landlords.
Yeah, well, that's so the people homeowners buying new houses, or new to them houses, is about 10 to 15% of our business, and then the other 80, 85, 90% is landlords, because every pre-1978 rental property in the state of Maryland has to be lead paint inspected.
Neil, is that nationwide, or is that just in Maryland that you know of?
Well, it's in several states, but it's not nationwide. Okay. So there's laws in DC, there's laws up in Massachusetts, but it's state by state.
Okay, gotcha. So what is lead paint?
Well, lead paint by definition is a paint that has a certain percent or higher of lead in it. Okay, we can go into details on that, but it's really not that important. Okay, lead paint itself. This is interesting about lead paint that a lot of people don't understand, is that lead paint itself is safe. So lead paint is safe, lead dust is not. So when lead paint chips, peels, flakes, gets on the floor, so it falls to the floor, it's turned into dust. The kids play on the floor, put their hands in their mouth, suck their thumbs, and that's how they ingest the lead. And that's where the real danger comes from.
So some people think that it's the kid actually sucking on the windowsill or with their mouth or whatever, and they're ingesting the actual chip. Is there harm in that, or is it just the dust?
No, there's absolutely harm in that, but the myth is that that's the only way to get it. Some people, I hear people say all the time to me, well, just don't let your kids eat lead paint chips and you'll be fine. Not really. All they have to do is touch the floor, crawl on the floor, put their hands in their mouth, suck their thumbs, walk around with their fists in their mouth as they're teething, and they can ingest the lead that way, in addition to eating the paint chips.
So a lot of the dust is created from what I understand, and this is back and forth with conversations over the years with you. A lot of the dust is created on old windows, opening and closing windows. I mean, where else does the dust generate?
So let's talk about that for a second. So you're correct, but it's really important, I think, to understand why that is. So you say, why does it happen on Windows? Well, it happens on Windows because there's a lot of expansion and shrinkage with the hot and the cold outside versus inside. There's moisture around Windows, which causes the chipping, peeling, flaking paint. So anytime you've got that defective paint, okay, it just happens to be around Windows a lot, you're going to have that potential for being a lead hazard. The other thing is when you have an abrasion surface. So if you have a window that goes up and down, it's creating microscopic lead dust, even if you can't see it, just by rubbing against itself. And the same thing that might apply to a stairs or a floor that might be painted with lead paint. Constant micro abrasions can be an issue. Okay, but the point being is that anywhere you've got defective paint, and if it's lead paint, that's going to create a lead hazard.
And I guess in doing home improvements, which we'll get into in a little while here, I mean, certainly there's risk in doing that.
Yes.
Yep. So how did we ever know that this stuff was bad? I mean, I grew up, I was born in 1968. So, when they made this law, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the law, 78 was the cutoff. How did they know this stuff was bad back then?
So the interesting thing, I'm going to put this in perspective for you, Todd. The interesting thing is France outlawed lead paint in 1898. So there was plenty of research and scientific evidence and anecdotal evidence that there was a problem back then. It took us to almost 100 years later for the United States of America to outlaw it, but they knew it was a problem back then. We for sure knew it was a problem even in the 40s. So what happened in the 40s is two things kind of happened. One is the war happened. So all the lead went into the bullets and the bombs and all that kind of thing. But they stopped using lead paint on the interior of the properties in the early 40s, but still use it on the exterior of the properties because that's where the lead really protected well against the weather. Okay. The thing that is amazing about lead paint, and if you see the advertisements of the paint cans and the commercials and the newspaper ads from 80 to 100 years ago, I'm talking like back in 1920, they say you paint the outside of your house with this lead paint, and we guarantee it'll be, we'll guarantee it for 20 years. Now,
Wow,
today
that's a long time.
Yeah, and that was 100 years ago. With all the technology we have today, you can't get more than 2, 3, 4, 5 years out of an exterior painted surface before it starts to deteriorate.
Sure.
That's how good lead paint was at doing its job of protecting the wood against the elements.
Do you know what what were the symptoms back then? I mean, do you know why they said, hey, this stuff is, taking advice from France? Or, were people getting sick?
Well, what they really they started to notice it back in like the 1600s in the painters, because the painters would be dying with such poisoned bodies at such an early age. And that started to create the quote research, whatever you want to call it back then. And then the more research they did, the more evidence was that this was a real problem. And what it does is it affects your brain development. So the body mistakes it for iron. Iron, obviously you need iron to grow. It mistakes and it absorbs the lead paint in a young developing nervous system and brain, and it actually disables you mentally. So you see a lot of aggressive behavior. You see a lot of lower IQs, that kind of thing. It's hard to pinpoint, but it's very obvious over the course of a spectrum of hundreds of thousands of children over the decades. Yeah.
So I've heard where it may be one of the causes of ADHD.
Yep.
And they say that, sometimes people with lead paint poisoning have, daytime drowsiness. They have a hard time,
Yep.
Getting up and getting ready and going out. So you say they stopped using it in 1940s inside the house, or what?
Yeah, so that's a rule of thumb. So just us based on doing tens of thousands inspections, that's what we've kind of found is that in the early 40s, 42, 43, 44, they stopped using lead paint on the interior. And then they stopped using it on the exterior in the mid to late 60s.
So why 1978? Why do they say, if your house was if your house was built, pre 1978, that's when, you need all these disclosures.
So that's when the law went into effect that forbid it to be sold for lead paint. So, and don't quote me on this, but I think in the late 60s, they were told to stop manufacturing lead paint, but they needed almost 10 years to work the lead paint through the distribution systems because it could sit on the shelf in the storage and the equivalent of Home Depot back then. I guess that would be Sears and those kinds of places. And so after 1978, they actually had to pull it off the shelves.
Okay.
But the reality is, and this is, I think, really important for people, the reality is we find very few houses in the 1970s that have lead paint. It does happen, but it's very few.
Yeah, and we get asked a lot, so we'll have a landlord or somebody that wants to invest, and they'll say, well, I only want, to look at properties that were built after 78. And we're saying, hey, look, it doesn't mean, it could be 1965 and not have lead paint, correct?
Correct. And even if there is some lead paint, it might be very minor on the exterior. Okay. So it's definitely, you just have to pay for the test. So if you're committed to have something lead free and you're going to buy pre 78, you're just going to have to, kind of gut up and pay the $300 to $350 to have it tested. So that it is lead free, or you can make it lead free based on what you find in that test.
So, and then I guess it was still used really as like the semi-gloss that actually goes in the windows and the doors. Is that why you're finding it in a lot of these, 1960s houses where it's not actually on the walls, but it's on the trim?
Okay, yes, but let me just correct that. So remember, they stopped using lead paint in the early 40s on the inside.
Okay.
So so in a 1960s house, almost always they're pretty close to lead free.
Okay.
Assuming they have replacement windows. So let's go backwards. Let's go to the 1920s, 1930s. Most of the houses built in Baltimore, they're going to be pretty loaded with lead, and it's going to be you're correct, in those glossy paints, and it's going to be predominantly in all the trim, baseboards, window casings, door casings, staircase components. But here's the interesting thing: 80 to 90% of the time, it's not in the walls. Okay.
So is that still in the 1920s and 30s? It's not in the walls?
Correct.
Interesting.
Just a rule of thumb, 80 to 90% of the time, it's not for sure. And if it is in the walls, it's going to be in the bathrooms and the kitchens. Now, can you guess why that is?
Semi-gloss.
Yes, no. But why semi-gloss?
They want a more durable, be able to clean it.
Yeah, because there's more moisture, there's heat, there's moisture, bathrooms, you got showers. So you're getting you want to protect the.
I was almost there.
Yeah, the substrate.
I was getting to that.
Yeah, you were getting
around. That's right. So who's at the most risk? I hear, children that are in their developmental years. So is that true?
Yes.
Are adults at risk? Am I at risk?
So, as a rule of thumb, we're talking kids ages 0 through 6 and pregnant women. People like you, Todd, would not be at risk unless you're pregnant, which I don't think you are.
No, not yet. Anyway,
you don't plan on getting pregnant.
Right. I don't plan on it.
And you could be at risk if you were a contractor dealing with lead paint every day.
Okay.
Where you could breathe in and you're sanding and scraping and throwing the lead dust up in the air and then breathing it in. So that could be an issue. But 99.99% of the time, we're talking kids ages 0 through 6 and pregnant women.
Okay.
And let me break down the 0 through 6 a little bit because it's kind of interesting. So some people are very concerned, I'm pregnant, I'm having a child, I want to get my house tested. And they're 3 months pregnant, where they're at least a year away from having a concern about the child, because the first 6 months, the child's not crawling, walking, it's not, they're in so it's really from like 6 months to 3 years where I see all the elevated elevated blood levels for lead paint. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get it when you're 4 or 5 or 6 or when you're 3 months, but you see this huge spike between 6 months and 36 months.
So how about the do-it-yourself project, person that, they're renovating the house that they're living in, and it is a 1920s or 30s house, may have lead paint in there. And so you say, I'm not at risk as an adult and a contractor that does it every single day. But what type of precautions should people be taking if, they're renovating their home and they have lead paint?
So what they've discovered in the studies is that most white collar people or families get, if they do get lead paint poisoning, they get it through doing renovations to the house. And sometimes, and so that could be, disturbing the paint, right? Making, chipping, peeling, not sawing it, but sanding it or scraping it, throwing it up in the air. It goes out into the different rooms. Maybe you're not using plastic. What I see a lot is I see a homeowner take on a project, him or herself, and take 2 years to finish it. So at least when the contractor comes in, even if the contractor doesn't do it the right way, it's done incorrectly. There's lead dust everywhere, but then it gets cleaned up immediately and you're pretty safe. But if you do it and you're taking time, you get distracted for 6 months, that's when you could actually create a real lead hazard, because elevated blood levels, i.e. lead poisoning, happens as a rule of thumb over prolonged exposure. It doesn't happen just touching one time and putting your hands in your mouth. So if you're disturbing your kitchen and you're doing a little bit of work every day and you keep creating lead dust, that's what can create the problem over days, weeks, months, etc.
So Neil, you're called in a lot of times and we're going to get into the contractor side of things. Yep. and the landlord, some of the concerns that landlords should have, and we're going to talk about that. And there are definite concerns. But you're called in a lot of times as expert witness to give testimony on, lead poisoning. And do you have any, stories that you can tell us that, where people that that have, had lead paint poisoning and what, how they are, or, what the extremes were of that?
Right. So let me say a couple of things. One is a lot of parents, when I deal with homeowners, okay, as opposed to tenants, are very concerned about all the things that they maybe should be a lower priority. They're worried about lead in soil. They're worried about the outside the house with lead. And they're worried about the toys from China. All that is a legit concern, absolutely. But they've kind of proven that 98% of all lead poisoning with children comes from the lead paint in the house. It's not all the other stuff. That's only 2 to 3% of the poisoning. Okay. So we deal with this probably about 3 times a month. We get a call with an elevated blood level from a parent. Okay. It's automatically reported. So the way that you test for lead, this is kind of interesting too, is usually the child gets a finger prick. And a little bit of blood comes out and they test it. It's called a capillary test. It's not the most accurate test, but it gives them a sense. If that tests positive, then they go back and do a blood draw where they actually, stick the needle in and take the blood out. That's the most accurate way. So what'll happen is most kids in target housing is defined as pre-1978 properties, are required to get tested as part of their pediatrician visits. Okay, so the pediatrician does a normal test for lead, draws their blood, and then boom, let's say it tests over a 5. 5 is kind of the number right now, which is down from 10 just a few years ago, which is down from 30 15 years ago. So they keep lowering. They've really established that there is no safe level of lead in your blood. Okay. So what happens, and this is what you also need to understand, is that when the doctor finds out that it's positive, you get notified, and obviously your doctor will talk to you about what to do, but then the doctor is required to notify the health department, and the health department will come out, and the health department might make you do certain abatement, to protect the child against any further problems. A 5 is not, it's always the end of the world when it's your child, right? But as a lead inspector, we're not so worried about a 5. What we're worried about is that 5 becomes a 10 or a 15. So we want to stop. We want to nip it in the bud and bring it back down to a 1, a 2, or 3, and not have it go up.
So how old are these children when they first start testing?
Usually around 2.
Okay. So they test them. Okay. So they basically say, are you living in a house that's pre-1978? Or do they say, have you ever lived in a house that's pre-78?
It seems to go by zip codes. So
Okay.
you might be in a new house, but if you're in Baltimore City, you're getting tested.
Okay.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
So this is like a pre-testing also for school, right? I mean, you have to get certain tests, and lead is one of them.
And I believe they get finger pricked at school also. So they're getting consistently tested throughout their younger years. The exceptions to that, which I have found, might be illegal immigrants. And I've seen some of the highest elevated blood levels in the 40s and 50s because I think they're afraid, either they don't know, they're ignorant, or they're afraid to go to doctors so they don't get tested. So one of the best things that we've ever done as a society is test the kids, because now we catch it at such an early stage that we can intervene and make sure it doesn't get up to 30, 40, 50, where you're starting talking about potential brain damage.
So does the elevation happen with continued exposure, or can you test at a 5 and then still not be exposed to it anymore and it continues to go up?
You would, I'm not a doctor, but I would say, based on what I've read and learned and experienced, is the continued exposure has it go up. If you stop the exposure, it comes back down.
Okay. It goes down. It doesn't stay that way. I mean, does lead ever leave your body? I heard it never leaves your body.
It's stored in the bones, in the marrow, which is one of the reasons why it's an issue for pregnant women. Because if you had an elevated blood level that might be just stored in your bones, when you become pregnant, the hormones release that lead into the bloodstream, which then gets into the fetus.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if the mom had been exposed to lead and it's in her bone marrow, then she could actually contaminate her child later?
Her fetus through 2 ways: through just the blood in the fetus, right? Because now the hormone changes when a woman gets pregnant, for whatever reason, releases that lead into the bloodstream from the bone marrow. Okay. The second way that can happen is through breastfeeding. So let me give you an unbelievable story from my perspective. This will kind of blows my mind. I had an elevated blood level in a very white collar, very wealthy home in Washington, D.C. Go down there, find just a small amount of lead in a couple spots. And there was no way, in my view, how that child would get lead poisoning from those small spots. So I knew we did not find the solution. And we started testing all the plateware and the silverware and the glassware that the child used. Found nothing. Finally, I asked if they were breastfeeding. They said yes. I said, great, you should have the wife get tested. The wife gets tested and comes back at over a 50. Now remember, we're talking about 5. The health departments get involved with a 5 for a child, and the mother tests as a 50. Well, right then and there, we know that the mother's transmitting the elevated blood levels to the child through the breast milk, because she was still breastfeeding. We still couldn't find the source of her with her elevated blood levels. Finally, it got figured out. Then the doctor helped us. She had tea every day out of a specific cup. That tea, that water inside that cup would test negative. However, when she put a lemon in there, it would test positive. Like, just mind-boggling, because the acid from the lemon would eat away at the glaze that was on the inside and would then leach into the water, and then she would drink the water. I mean, that's obviously a once-in-a-lifetime kind of a situation.
She was being poisoned by her teacup.
Yes, only when there was lemon in there. So when I tested it, it didn't come back positive because there was no lemon in it at the time. But the doctor asked us to do that, and she said I'd drink it with lemon, and he had known something, and he pointed her towards testing that, and we did, and found incredibly high levels when there was a lemon, because it was eating away at the glaze, which was positive on the cup, the ceramic cup.
Wow.
Yep.
So let's talk about people that are having work done in their homes. So, right
Yep.
now we're coming through the pandemic, and, a home improvement work is like at the highest, scale right now,
Right.
because everybody's working from home and they're looking at all the projects that they want to get done. And so, when homeowners are hiring contractors and they are in these homes that are pre-78 and certainly in the 20s and 30s that, where they're going to be disturbing, trim and potential areas of lead, what should they be doing?
So let's first separate a couple things. Let's make sure we separate a homeowner from a landlord because the rules are completely different. Okay.
I want to get to the landlord later.
Yeah,
We'll get to the landlord.
Right. So I just want to make sure we're talking about homeowners now. So a homeowner, so the Maryland state law says that any pre-1978 paint is considered to be automatically lead paint, whether it technically is or not, unless you prove otherwise. So it's just assumed that anything built prior to 78 has lead paint. And the new EPA law, I say new, it passed in 2010, says that if the contractor, if they're going to work on a pre-78 house, has to assume that it's got lead paint and use lead-safe work practices, or prove that it's not lead paint. Okay. Now, so the problem that you have with this, you have kind of two things that contractors have a problem with. One is it costs about 20% more to use those lead safe work practices. So contractors, as a rule of thumb, don't bid. They don't want to do it that way because then they end up with a higher price than somebody that's bidding the job that's not. So it's really up to the homeowner that they're going to go out and make sure that they're going to follow, that they're going to hire an EPA certified contractor, which all contractors are supposed to be EPA certified. RRP would be the renovation, repair, and painting contractor. Okay. Then, so they're going to hire that contractor. They're going to do it. But the other thing that contractors don't want to do is contractors don't like to be told by the government how to do their job. So if you are the homeowner, it's your job then to go out and talk to the contractor and say, I want to follow our RPP rules. And then you'll find that the contractors that don't want to follow those rules probably won't call you back. That's been my experience.
Okay. So, and the way to follow those rules would be if you're getting home improvement work done by a contractor and you're living in a home that was built pre-1978, at the very least, they need to prove that the area that they're disturbing, that there isn't any lead paint to be disturbed in that specific area.
Or assume that it is lead paint and use the lead safe work practices, puts up the plastic, puts up the warning signs. There's certain ways you clean. There's certain ways you have to sand and scrape. You have wet sand and wet scrape with collection bags. And there's certain way you have to dispose of any waste that you have and double bag it and bring it to the dump and a certain thickness of the plastic bags. All these different rules they have to follow, and them and all their workers have to be trained. And then at the very end, they have to prove that the property is safe. So, and this is kind of one of the pressure points in lead paint for me when I coach homeowners is that, you can have a nuclear bomb go off in your house, and as long as you clean it up correctly, you're fine. So even if the contractor doesn't do things right, as long as you're not living there and it's cleaned up before you go back and sleep in the house, you're fine. So the contractor needs to either demonstrate, and there's different ways he can do that it's safe, that there's no lead dust left behind, or you call a third party lead paint company like ourselves, and we will go out and take swipes and send them to a lab and just make sure there's no lead dust left behind from the renovation.
That sounds a lot more expensive to have a home.
20%.
Yeah. So you're adding 20% to the job. And so, guys, if you're out there, certainly, and you're getting home improvement work done at your house, Neil is giving some very valuable advice right here, especially if you have, children, you're a mom and you're pregnant and you have children up to 6 years of age, probably should make certain that these contractors do have, the certification or that they're following these practices. So let's talk a little bit about, commercial. What I don't understand here. So two things. Number one, I've heard from contractors that, they don't need PPE. The actual people doing the work, and that's personal protection equipment or
Right.
safety stuff. Like we all know about the N95 masks now, where you may not have ever heard that term before pre-COVID. But is it true that is it the same now as it was the last time that we spoke? It's been a couple years. I mean, do these contractors, or, is it a requirement that they get protected when they're, by respirators and things like that?
Yes, and it depends on the type of work they're doing. Okay, so and that's part of their training. One of the big mistakes they make is they wear those what it looks like a gas mask, right? With the thing that comes out the side, but then they have the wrong filter in there. So they think they're safe and they're breathing through the lead dust because they got the wrong filter. It needs to be the purple HEPA filter. Okay. So lots of times you'll see homeowners think they're being safe by just wearing a normal mask, a $1 mask, but it should be the full-blown gas mask looking respirator that you're talking about with the purple HEPA filter. And all this stuff, we can go into these details, Todd, but all this stuff's on the web. If somebody's interested, they can find all the different procedures to follow to do a lead safe.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll actually post a couple of those posts in the,
Okay.
after, we're finished up here, when we, kind of push this out, we'll make sure that you guys have links below, and certainly all of Neil's information as well, because he's an expert at this. And I've personally used Neil. So I want to kind of switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about landlords.
Can we go back to, I want to address
Absolutely.
one thing about the homeowner. So one of the things that happens when you get a contractor and it's important to you that the contractor do it right, and they don't do it right, it can become a living nightmare. Okay. So let's say you're still living in the house where you're getting this construction work done. They're not following the rules. There's lead dust everywhere. Now you have to move out into a hotel or into the in-laws house. Then the lead dust can get sucked through the HVAC system and disperse among all your rooms, even if they're not doing the lead paint renovations in those rooms. Then you say, okay, well, no big deal. We just have to clean those rooms. Okay, but what do you do to the bedspreads? What do you do to all the clothes? What do you do to the couches? All that furniture, that lead dust will land on any horizontal surface. So I've seen people with $1,000, $2,000 dry cleaning bills. They take their whole closets out and take them to get dry cleaned because they don't want to get the lead dust that's on them. So just know that if lead poisoning or lead paint is important to you because you have a young child, you're a pregnant woman, you should definitely do it right from up front, because it could just be a nightmare if you don't try to fix it later. Okay. The other thing I want to say is it's very, you're talking about a 10, a 20, a 30, a 40, a 80, a $200,000 renovation job, whatever the dollar amount is. The average cost to do the lead paint test is only about $300, maybe $400 if it's a big house. Okay. And that will tell you where the lead paint is. So you might find in your 1950s house that you're lead free. That is so worth the $300 or $400 test to be able to save, if you're doing a $50,000 rehab at a 20% markup for lead safe, that's a $10,000 additional expense that you would then save by a $400 lead test. So it's definitely worthwhile to talk to a lead professional, get their opinion before you start the process, because by doing the testing up front, you might be able to save thousands of dollars.
Yeah. So Neil, and just because, Ronnie here is asking the question too, if you could just repeat that again. So Ronnie's asking what's the typical cost of lead paint testing. So you said that was about $350 or $400.
Well, we do we charge like $295 in the Baltimore City, Baltimore County area. Then it can go up to $345 in Montgomery, PG, different, farther out counties. And of course, if you're over 3,000 square feet, it can go a little bit higher. But you're looking at around 300, maybe 350, 95% are in that range.
And Neil, just to kind of go over that a little bit, you actually, you have an X-ray machine.
Yes.
Right. So you actually X-ray, and I think it's a couple hundred shots, right? Talk a little bit about that capability.
Yeah, so first off, it is an X-ray gun. We actually need a radiation permit from the state to carry it. Now, it's not dangerous, okay? And it can shoot through all the layers of paint and determines if there's lead paint in that 1-inch square area that you're shooting. Okay. Now there's very strict protocols on how you test a house that we have to follow. Okay. And it's kind of like taking the sampling if you were polling for the president, meaning you're going to sample 1,000 people and you kind of tell who's going to win the presidency. Same kind of thing. As long as you follow those protocols, what HUD has determined is we'll take the 100 to 200 to 300 readings, whatever those protocols dictate for that particular house. And if it all comes back negative, there's a 95% chance that that house is actually lead free. Okay. So it takes somewhere between, an hour to 2 hours, just depending. Okay.
And you actually do inside and out, right?
Inside, exterior, your outbuildings, if you have barns and garages and things like that also.
So we have, so we'll answer one more question here before we get into landlording. So Ruth is asking, what is the difference from a testing standpoint and certifying a place lead-free and lead-safe?
Great question. Now I'm gonna answer this question for a homeowner, then I'm going to answer a little bit differently for a landlord, and we start talking about that. So lead-free means just kind of what it sounds, that it's been certified that it meets the Maryland standard for what constitutes a lead-free house. So there's no lead paint on the interior or the exterior. Lead-safe means there is lead paint there, or it's assumed to be there, and there's no chipping, peeling, flaking paint. So remember, that's what causes the problem, right? So we do a visual inspection to make sure there's no chipping, peeling, flaking paint. And then you might take dust wipes from each room, send them to a lab to make sure there's no lead dust present. And if you pass that, you can say your house is safe. But, and this is like really critical, the thing to remember is that lead safe inspection is a moment in time inspection. Just because it's safe today doesn't mean it's safe 6 months from now or 8 months from now. Because the paint could deteriorate over time. The windows can go up and down. All the lead dust can occur. So that's the kind of tricky thing about lead safe, is that it's a moment in time test.
All right. Well, let's dive into the landlord
okay, good.
Slot here. So I'm a landlord myself.
Yep.
And I know Neil, now I'll plug you a little bit. I know you've been my guy for the better part of 10 years. And, what I'm buying properties, I always send you out to say, hey, check this place out. Let me know if there's any lead and where, if any. And a lot of times that is the process that we use in our due diligence to determine whether we even want to buy the place or not, because we don't want to deal with lead. And in fact, if you're a landlord, or you're looking at jumping into this space, something really important that you need to know now, and we're going to talk a little bit about the legal side of it, is that most banks or lenders, if you're looking for a long-term solution in financing your rental or your investment, a lot of the banks now, they won't even finance something unless it's lead-free. They don't want lead-safe because they know that there is that risk. So I want to just kind of take you guys back, and Neil will zoom in on some of these dates. But the way it used to be in the old days, I guess we'll just say that, and Neil, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but there used to be insurance for things like lead paint claims or whatever. And there used to be like ceilings on what could, what somebody that was poisoned, experienced lead paint poisoning, what they could actually come back on the landlord and actually win. And then at some point, they were saying that wasn't enough. I think it was $20,000. Was it, Neil? 20,000 at one point?
17,500.
Okay. So that was like the cap.
Right.
And then what the legislator said was, you know what? And the lobbyists, they said, that's ridiculous. I mean, if somebody has lead paint poisoning from a child and they're going to live with this for potentially the rest of their life, 17.5 is nothing. And then they really couldn't decide on what that should be. And as the session was coming to an end, they just decided that they were just going to not have a ceiling on what the claim amount could be. Right.
So your reasoning is spot on.
Okay.
The actual way that happened though was the 17,500 became law, and then many years later, 5-10 years later, whenever it was in 2010, the Maryland Court of Appeals, which is the Supreme Court in Maryland, said that was an unconstitutional law because the child might be facing $500,000 of medical expenses over the next 50 years of his life, and to give him 17.5 was unconstitutional. So landlords thought they had protection all going into 2010, and then overnight it disappeared.
And so that's when everybody started calling me saying, we want to sell our rental properties. And the interesting thing that went along with that is they said that these, landlords can't hide behind their corporate, shields or corporate veils. And they actually pierced the corporate veil, saying that if you are actually sued on a lead paint case, that it's personal to the owners of those properties. And that really scared the living daylights out of the investors. And so, is it still that way today?
In Baltimore City, yes. So that's a very specific ruling that went against Baltimore City because the way the Baltimore City code is written. But what most landlords don't understand, because they don't understand that case, is that it doesn't, even if you have a management company operate, if you have the ability to buy or sell it, to sell the property, the law considers that you have control, and they pierce through all your trusts, all your LLCs, all your corporations, and it becomes personal liability. And there's just no way around that. And if you talk to a lead paint lawyer whether it be a defendant lawyer, somebody who defends landlords, they will tell you that most of the time you're going to lose between 97 and 99% of the time.
And the way, and I don't know, and I know, you and I have spoken about a specific, story that I want you to talk about when you went to lunch with one attorney. And, but before we get into that, I really want to talk about what I heard was, somebody, tests positive for lead, and then there's a period of time, maybe 18 years or whatever, when they're 18 years old, and you'll clear that up. But basically what happens is if they lived in 5 or 6 places, during their adolescent years, basically they throw everybody into that bucket and they sue everybody. And then basically it comes down to you, the landlord, needing to actually defend yourself or determining, who all is going to pay the bill, the claim. And so clear that up. And is there, am I on target?
You're on target, but it's actually worse than what you said.
Okay.
Because what happens is they're going to take on those 5 places where the child used to live, but they're also going to sue every place that child visited and played. So sometimes it's not unheard of to have, if you're on the 3200 block of, pick a street, Kenyon, and you'll see 20 owners on Kenyon being sued because the plaintiff said that their child played at that house. So it could be like 30 defendants in a because what does it cost the attorney just to put somebody's name on there? Then you have to prove. Then you're gonna even if you have a lead-free cert, you might spend thousands of dollars in legal fees just to get yourself off the lawsuit. It's just unbelievable.
So is that any homeowner that had this child play at their house? It's not just a landlord, it's anyone.
We all know what these attorneys are like. They just put anybody on there and they just they throw 30 owners against the wall and see what sticks. And
Interesting.
And the problem is, we all know that as landlords, your profit margin might be $200 or $300 a month, and you'll blow through 7 years of profit in 3 months of legal bills, just 3 months, let alone going to trial.
Yeah. So you see where this goes, guys, you investors or you landlords, let's just fast track this conversation. If you're not certified lead free, and that's what I heard actually from an attorney, that's probably like your only saving grace. You still have to hire an attorney, but if you can say, hey, since I've owned this property, it's been certified lead free. I don't know, Neil, does that get you a get out of court free ticket at that point?
Well, I'm going to say 2 things. So first off, yes and no. Okay. So first of all, if you're certified lead free, the chances of you getting sued go down dramatically. I mean, exponentially. Of all the times, because the chances of a child getting elevated blood levels from that house are very slim. Okay. So if you look at we say we deal with like maybe 3 elevated blood levels cases a month. So I've dealt with 300 or 400 of those over the years. 95% of them are in houses that are lead safe and not lead free. So just by going lead free, you've lowered forget about the politics and the lawsuit. You just lowered it dramatically because people aren't going to get elevated blood levels because there's no lead there. Okay, that's number one. Number two is it's not a get out of jail free card, but it seems that most attorneys do, if they might double check. So if you produce a lead free certificate, they might send their lead guy in to check, and as long as it comes back lead free, they'll probably let you off the case. Now, that's just what I've seen happen. I'm not an attorney. It doesn't always happen that way. Some attorneys are jerks, as you know, but you're still going to pay some legal fees just to be, once you get served with a lawsuit, you got to hire an attorney. So it's just, it's scary from that point. A lot of people ask me, and this is kind of what you're getting at, Todd, and they ask me, should I own a property with lead in it? And here's what I tell them, because it's, some people have no problem with that. But what I tell them is that all my sophisticated clients, and I'll define sophisticated clients as clients with money to lose, will not rent out properties with lead to people. Now, they might have properties that still have lead. They rented out 10 years ago, but as the tenants turn over, they're making them lead free. They're not buying, if the properties have lead, they're making them lead free before they put tenants in them when they buy them. So the sophisticated clients that have lawyers and know how this works are not, as a rule of thumb, are not renting out properties with lead on the inside to tenants. Some of them will be okay with lead on the outside because the chances of getting lead poison from the outside is very slim. And the cost to make something lead free on the outside can be very high with garages and cornices and soffits and fascias. There could be a lot of different work involved. And so a lot of people, 80% of those sophisticated clients are fine with it being lead free on the inside. And the other 20% want it to be lead free inside and out. So I'll leave it at that.
So what about if you had a rental property and it was, limited or lead safe, and you've sold that property, and the liability, I guess they come and find you, right? I mean, so if you were the landlord at the time that this child lived in the.
Yeah. So Todd, let's say you're a contractor, hypothetically, and I hire you to go remodel my bathroom, and I give you $1,000 down, and you disappear and you never do any work. I think the statute of limitations on fraud is 3 years or something. Like, you defrauded me, right? I have 3 years to go after you. Well, the statute of limitations on lead paint is 3 years also, but it's 3 years from when the child turns 18 and becomes an adult and can make a choice for themselves if they want to sue their landlord. So the real problem is that you have almost up to 21 years, which is just mind-boggling to me that somebody can come after. You can be retired living in Florida and start facing lead paint lawsuits that come left and right because they've got up to 21 years to go after you. 3 years from when the child turns 18.
So I have another question here from Ruth. Once a specific property is certified lead free, does that designation stay with the property via registration with MDE? I guess even as it transfers ownership, maybe?
Yep. So lead certificates, whatever lead certificate you have, it doesn't matter if it's lead free, limited lead free, or what you would call lead safe, but technically it's called a full risk reduction, which is the dust wipes. Okay. All your lead certs go with the property, not with the owner. So if as long as it's still valid and you sell the property, that certificate is still valid for the new owner. Gotcha.
So tell your story about your lunch with the attorney that we were talking about, kind of blew my mind, but
there's just two stories in here. So this was a defendant attorney. So I only do work for defendants, landlords, because that's where my focus is. And so I would do a lot of work for him, Todd, where he would want me to go test a property where the kid used to live 20 years ago. So I have to knock on the door that nobody lived. I mean, it's 20 years ago. This is a different owner, 10 different owners since then. Have to talk my way, and sometimes I pay the tenant to let me in and do the lead test. And I might have to go 10 times to try to get in. So I sit down with the guy. I say, "You're spending all this money, $7,000-8,000, having me test 10 properties for one lead paint lawsuit." I go, "Are you getting these people off?" And he started laughing hysterically. He goes, "We never get anybody off." He goes, what I use you for, Neil, is I get the judgment from 1.7 million down to 1.1 million. And that was like mind-boggling to me. And then he said, here's how bad it is, Todd. And this is the ultimate blow your mind story. He said he defended a landlord where they proved that the mother sold the kids into slavery. That's how bad of a mother she was. They proved that she sold the kids into slavery. But before they did that, one of the kids tested positive, and they still lost $1 million verdict. Even though they could prove how bad the mom was, how she didn't take care of the kids, didn't take care of the house, it doesn't matter if you're the landlord. So I want to be responsible, Todd, because some people hear this and they see me talking about the liability is so great, but it all can be. I used to own restaurants, and even though I might have had insurance for salmonella, if somebody had salmonella or gets E. coli, I'm out of business. And even I might get some insurance in case somebody sues me, my business is still toast, right? So as a business owner, you just have to decide what risk you're willing to take. And most sophisticated landlords are willing to take the risk as long as the inside is lead free. So don't let all my stories like completely scare you. They're intended to scare you a little bit, but you can take the appropriate actions to protect yourself as long as you feel okay with that liability that you're taking on.
And I guess that's a lot of times why these landlords are calling up saying that they only want properties that are after 78, because at that point, it was illegal to use lead paint, and chances are, you're in the clear. Do you ever see anybody sued that has a house that was built after 78?
I've never seen that.
Okay. And so let's talk. I mean, there's no insurance for this, right? I mean, there's no insurance that a landlord can get.
Well, there used to be insurance up until about 1990, give or take. And what happened was they started getting so many lawsuits, the insurance company stopped insuring people in around 1990. So that's why the insurance is kind of it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's not expired, but so landlords used to go after the attorneys used to go after the landlords because they had insurance, and then once you get a guilty verdict, the insurance company has to pay. When you get a judgment against you. So, but now it's a little bit different because there's no insurance. So there is still some insurance available, but only for large landlords are going to insure 30, 40, 50 properties and can get a blanket lead paint coverage on that. So that does exist. It's expensive, but I do know that people do get it, but it's only available for large landlords.
Interesting. I didn't even know it was available. So that's good.
Yep.
That's good information. So what are you seeing the claims now? I mean, obviously you were talking about getting from a 1.7 million down to 1.2 million. No one has that, or very few people have that. Right. So it's horrible. It's frightening. But what do you see people getting now? I
see the attorneys getting what the person can afford to pay. So if the person only has 20,000 to their name, that's what they're getting. If they have 80,000, that's what they're getting. So, but I can't.
What the person has to their name?
Yeah.
Like everything. It's all of it.
Because exactly. Like if so a lot of the negotiation is just what you can afford to pay. And you might have to have an affidavit of your net worth statement. And if you don't have any money, they'll just take what you have. Now I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something to what you just said about the
amount of money that they're getting.
So, so having like free and clear properties that are paid off is not a good thing.
Yeah.
But even if
they get the property.
Yeah. Even if you have only 20 grand in your name, you say, I don't have much to risk. I'm telling you, the wear and tear and the negative energy and the concern and the stress you're going to go through as they threaten you with all these things and these courts and lawsuits and judgments, it is so not worth it. I mean, I just can't explain to you not just the money, but just the stress you're going to go through over a multi-year process as you deal with somebody suing you.
Oh, absolutely. So, we're getting ready to wrap up here. We've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So, anything else you'd like to tell people about, this whole lead paint thing? Obviously it's a lot more serious. They've found out now as time goes on, it's a lot more dangerous and, causes more harm than we originally knew. Any parting words of advice?
Well, I'm not so much about parting words. Let me say one thing we didn't cover that I want to cover is that to be able to test for lead free, you have to have a higher level of accreditation, and you need the $17,000 X-ray machine. So there's 400 lead paint inspectors in Maryland, give or take, and only about 40 or 50 of us have those X-ray guns. So if you call a lead paint inspection company and they don't have the gun, they're not going to even tell you about lead free. So my advice to you, whoever you hire, whether it be us or somebody else, that you go out and get somebody who can give you objective advice, who has the highest level of accreditation and can walk you through what would be the best thing for your specific property. Okay. Because if you can't, you could have a 1977 property that's lead free, but if you hire the guy that doesn't have the gun, you won't get the lead free certificate. So I want to make sure people really understood that. Because that's a lot that I see a lot of frustration with landlords on that. I think you've talked a lot, Todd, about the negatives and the liability and all that. And I just want to leave people with, there's plenty of landlords that do it right, have lead-free properties, take care of business, and never get sued. So it is something you have to worry about, but I don't think it's quite as bad as it is as bad as we made it seem, but it shouldn't turn you off from real estate investing. It should just be something that you have to make an informed decision about what kind of risk you want to take to be a landlord in today's world.
Well, I think you said the key word, lead-free.
Yes.
So, if you want to landlord and something that, like you said, where you have the potential to build wealth or to accumulate, and this is something that you want to depend upon as passive income, which is the primary reason why people go through all this stuff. I mean, not all tenants are great. It's not, it's a business. So it's like any other business. It comes with its troubles and that kind of stuff. So, if you're committed to doing it, I think the key takeaway here tonight is to make sure that all of your properties are lead free. And no matter where you live, whether the law is that way in your town or not, no matter where you are in the United States, make sure that you're taking Neil's advice, and that if you're, you can call Neil if you're in Maryland. I certainly have used him for years, and he's the only one I use. And that's why he's on this show, because, I trust what he does, and all of my properties are lead free, and we would only have it that way. So take that as good advice. And guys, if you're doing those home improvement contracts at home, we want you safe, and make sure that you're taking Neil's advice with that you are, taking those precautions. And we'll post some links for you in the show notes. And we thank you so much for your time this Tuesday evening.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. And guys, thank you for watching. And we're every Tuesday night on Tuesday Night Live, where we bring you anything and everything real estate. And if you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe and that bell if you're on YouTube, or like or follow us in your favorite social media channel and audio podcast channel. And see you next time.
Thanks, Dad. Take care.
Thank you.